She was homeless, standing in the rain, ignored by everyone, until a billionaire stopped his helicopter, laughed, and said, "Fly this chopper, and I'll marry you." He had no idea that this woman's past would destroy his future. Let's continue this story. The morning sun hit the glass towers of New York like liquid gold, reflecting off the skyline that promised dreams, but rarely delivered them. Down below, on the cracked sidewalks where the rich never looked, a woman sat with a cardboard sign that simply read, "I can work. I just need a chance." Her name was Amara, and for the past 6 months, the streets had been her only home. Her clothes were worn, her shoes had holes, but her eyes still carried something the city hadn't managed to steal: hope. Every morning, she washed up at a nearby shelter, brushed her hair, and walked out determined to find any job that would keep her alive one more day. That morning, she walked past a tall building crowned with a massive logo, Skyline Aviation Corporation. The company was famous for building luxury helicopters for billionaires, politicians, and celebrities. Inside that building, behind the shiny glass doors, was Alexander Cole, the youngest CEO in aviation history. 32 years old, rich, confident, and feared by everyone around him. Alexander wasn't just known for his business genius. He was infamous for his arrogance. He didn't believe in luck, kindness, or second chances. To him, people like Amara were invisible until the day fate made them collide. Amara had stopped outside the building to pick up a fallen wallet. She opened it quickly, thinking someone must have dropped it. Inside was an ID with a familiar name, Alexander Cole, the same name on the building's sign. She looked up, scanning for anyone who might have dropped it. "Excuse me, sir," she shouted, running toward a man stepping out of a black SUV. Alexander turned, his expensive sunglasses reflecting her worn-out face. "What do you want?" he snapped. "You dropped this," Amara said softly, holding out the wallet. He took it from her hand, glanced at it, and smirked. "You didn't think about keeping it, huh? Not bad for someone living on the streets." "I don't steal," she said firmly. "That's why I'm out here, because I'd rather starve than take what isn't mine." Alexander raised an eyebrow. A moral homeless woman. Now that's rare. He was about to turn away when something about her voice made him pause. "You know what? Come inside." Amara hesitated. "Inside your office?" "Unless you'd rather stay out here and preach honesty to the pavement." With cautious steps, she followed him through the glass doors. Everyone inside stared, suits, assistants, receptionists, like a ghost had walked into their temple. Alexander sat down behind his desk, fingers steepled under his chin. "So, Amara, right? You need a job." "Yes, sir. I can clean, manage, assist, anything you need." He leaned back, amused. "Anything?" "Yes." He gestured toward the window where, far across the skyline, a helicopter gleamed on the rooftop pad. "You see that chopper?" Amara nodded. "Fly it," he said flatly. She blinked, thinking she'd misheard. "Fly it?" "Yes," he said, smiling coldly. "If you can fly that chopper right now, I'll give you a job. Hell, I'll marry you on the spot." His tone dripped with mockery, and the people in the room chuckled under their breath. Amara's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't look away. "You think that's funny?" she asked quietly. "I think life is funny," Alexander replied. "Especially when people like you think you deserve a place in this world." There was a heavy silence. Everyone waited for Amara to walk away in shame. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "I'll fly it." The laughter stopped. Alexander tilted his head. "Excuse me. You said if I fly that helicopter, you'll marry me. So take me to the roof." The CEO stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter. "You've got guts. Fine. Let's go see you crash." They stepped into the private elevator. As the doors closed, Alexander couldn't help but notice the steadiness in her eyes. She wasn't bluffing. When they reached the rooftop, the wind whipped around them, and the massive black helicopter shimmered under the sunlight. "You sure about this?" Alexander asked mockingly. "This thing costs more than your entire life." Amara walked toward it, her fingers tracing the body of the chopper with familiarity. Her mind flashed back to a different time, a life she'd buried long ago. 5 years ago, Amara wasn't homeless. She was a trainee pilot in the Air Corps. She had dreams of flying the skies, serving her country. But a tragic accident during a rescue mission had changed everything. Her father, also a pilot, had died in her arms after a system failure. The military blamed her, and she lost everything: her license, her home, and her faith. Now, standing on that rooftop, she looked at the controls and felt something she hadn't in years: purpose. She climbed inside the cockpit. Alexander stood with folded arms, waiting to see her fail. "Do you even know what you're touching?" he shouted over the wind. Amara didn't answer. She flipped the switches with precision, one by one. The engine roared to life. The helicopter lifted slightly off the pad, then hovered smoothly. Gasps filled the air. Alexander's smile faded. Amara brought it up higher, then circled once around the rooftop before landing it perfectly back in place. When the blade slowed, she stepped out calmly, brushing her hair away from her face. "You still want to marry me?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. For the first time in years, Alexander Cole was speechless. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the helicopter's cooling engine and the rush of wind sweeping across the rooftop. Alexander stood frozen, his expensive shoes rooted to the concrete, his expression a blend of disbelief and shock. The same man who had mocked her seconds ago now stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. The staff nearby exchanged nervous glances. They had never seen their boss speechless before. Alexander was known for his razor-sharp confidence and unshakable pride. Yet now, in front of a woman he had ridiculed, that facade had cracked. How did you do that?" he finally managed to say. Amara shrugged, trying to keep her voice steady. "You asked me to fly it. So I did." He stepped closer, studying her face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Who are you really?" "I told you. My name is Amara Johnson." Alexander narrowed his eyes. "No, that's not it. Nobody learns to fly like that without serious training. You flew like a professional pilot." She didn't answer. The memories were heavy, and she had learned that most people didn't care about her past. They only saw her present. So she just said quietly, "Let's just say I've spent some time in the sky." He looked at her for a long second, then turned toward his assistant. "Get her file ready. I want to know everything about her." Amara frowned. "I didn't come here to be investigated. I came here to ask for a job, not a background check." Alexander smirked, regaining a bit of his arrogance. "You just landed one of the most expensive helicopters in the city. I'd be stupid not to know who you are." He motioned for her to follow him back to the elevator. The doors closed, and the silence between them was heavy. When they reached the lobby, everyone stared again. But this time, their looks were different. No longer pity, but quiet respect mixed with curiosity. Amara didn't care. She just wanted to leave. "I don't want your charity," she said as they reached the exit. Alexander stopped her. "Wait." She turned. "You're right. I was an idiot to mock you. You've got talent and guts. If you're serious about working, report here tomorrow at 9. I'll make sure you're given a fair chance." She hesitated, unsure if this was another trick. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you've already proved me wrong once," he said simply. And with that, he walked away. The next morning, Amara stood in front of the Skyline building again. She had washed up at the shelter, borrowed a clean shirt, and tied her hair back neatly. Something about walking into that lobby again made her heart race. Not from fear, but from the strange possibility that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. Alexander's assistant greeted her politely this time. "Mr. Cole is expecting you. Follow me." When Amara entered his office, Alexander was already at his desk, sipping coffee and looking out over the skyline. He turned, his expression unreadable. "You're punctual." "Good. I said I'd come," she replied softly. He nodded. "I've reviewed your background." Her stomach tightened. "You did?" "Yes," he said, setting down the file. "You were part of the Air Corps. Top of your class. You logged over 800 flight hours before you were discharged." She looked away. "You found that out quickly." "I have my ways." He paused. "Why didn't you tell me who you really were?" "Because it doesn't matter anymore," she said quietly. "The Corps kicked me out after a mission went wrong. My father died that day. They blamed me." Alexander's gaze softened slightly. "I read the report. The mechanical failure wasn't your fault. The official file said the engine system malfunctioned. Your commanding officer signed off on it." Her head snapped up. "What did you say?" "The malfunction wasn't on you, Amara. Someone covered it up to protect the manufacturer's name." Her hands trembled slightly. "You're lying." "I don't lie about things like that," he said. In fact, he turned his laptop around and opened a file. "My company, Skyline, was the subcontractor for that helicopter model. When the crash happened, we were one of the firms under investigation. My father was running the company back then. The room fell silent. You mean, she started. Yes, Alexander said quietly. The same helicopter your father died in was one my family's company helped build. Amara stepped back, her eyes wide with disbelief. The weight of those words hit her like thunder. All the years of pain, guilt, and loss suddenly tangled with something new. Anger. So you're telling me, she said, her voice trembling, that your family's company was responsible for the death that ruined my life? Alexander didn't look away. Indirectly, yes. But I only found out after my father's death. I've been trying to uncover what really happened ever since. Amara shook her head. You expect me to believe you? Yesterday you mocked me like I was trash. And now you're pretending to care. His expression hardened. I was an idiot yesterday. But today, I'm telling you the truth. She turned toward the door, but he said something that made her freeze. Amara, your father wasn't just a pilot, Alexander said. He was the lead engineer who helped design that same aircraft model. His notes and blueprints were found in the archives, ones my father never wanted the world to see. She turned slowly. What are you talking about? I think your father discovered something before the crash. Something he wanted to expose. That's why I need your help. Her heart pounded in her chest. My help? Why me? Because you were there, he said. You know what happened in the cockpit that day. And if you help me uncover the truth, we can clear your name and your father's. Amara's emotions were a storm, grief, anger, confusion, and a spark of hope. Why would you want to help me? She whispered. Alexander looked away, his voice lower now. Because I owe your father my life. For a long time, Amara couldn't move. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Alexander's words echoed inside her mind. I owe your father my life. She took a shaky breath and looked at him, her voice barely more than a whisper. What do you mean you owe him your life? Alexander walked toward the window, hands in his pockets. His reflection on the glass looked nothing like the arrogant man she'd met yesterday. It was 15 years ago, he began. I was 17, reckless, spoiled, and thought money could buy anything. My father took me on one of his test flights. He wanted to show me the family legacy, as he called it. But something went wrong midair. The system started to fail, the rotors jammed, and the helicopter began to spin out of control. He paused, his voice trembling slightly as he continued. Your father, Captain Elijah Johnson, was the test pilot that day. He could have ejected, but he didn't. He stayed in the cockpit to stabilize the system long enough to get me and my father out safely. He saved us, and paid with his own life. Amara stared at him in stunned silence. Her father's face flashed before her eyes, the way he smiled, the way he always told her that bravery wasn't about being fearless, but about doing the right thing even when you were scared. My father never told me that, she whispered. They said it was just a training failure. Alexander turned, his eyes filled with regret. They lied to protect the company. My father ordered the entire report to be rewritten. He couldn't let investors know that a design flaw in the engine had caused the crash. He silenced the truth. Amara's chest tightened. And you think I'll just forgive you because you told me this now? No, he said quietly. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to fix what he broke. She looked away, tears burning her eyes. Fix it. You think you can fix 15 years of pain? You think you can fix the nights I spent blaming myself? The career I lost. Alexander said nothing. He knew she was right. But he also knew he couldn't let the truth die buried under corporate lies. After a long silence, Amara finally spoke. If you're serious about this, if you really want to expose what your father did, I'll help you. But not for you. For him. Alexander nodded slowly. For Captain Johnson. The next few weeks were unlike anything Amara had experienced in years. For the first time since her father's death, she had a reason to wake up in the morning. Alexander gave her a position in Skyline's research division, officially as a consultant. But behind the scenes, the two worked together to dig through years of company archives, hidden files, and confidential reports. Every evening, they sat in the dim light of Alexander's office, surrounded by boxes of documents and old flight logs. It wasn't long before Amara realized that Alexander wasn't the cold-hearted man she'd thought he was. Beneath his sharp exterior was someone haunted, someone who carried guilt like an invisible weight. One night, as they worked late, Amara looked up from a dusty folder. You don't have to do this, you know? The truth could destroy your company. Alexander looked at her, tired but determined. Then let it. I'd rather build something honest from the ground up than live off a lie. There was silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of unspoken understanding. Two broken souls, searching for the same redemption. Later that night, Amara found an old blueprint that made her heart skip a beat. It had her father's handwriting on it, his signature curves, the little arrows and notes in the margins. She traced them with her fingers, whispering his name. Dad. Alexander leaned closer. What is it? She pointed at a section circled in red ink. This is the component that failed, the hydraulic control valve. He marked it as unstable. He must have known it was dangerous. Alexander frowned. That means he tried to warn my father. But your father didn't listen, Amara said bitterly. No, Alexander replied, his voice heavy. He didn't. Amara looked up at him. Then the crash wasn't just an accident. It was preventable. He nodded slowly. And if we can prove that your father filed an official warning before the test flight, we can clear his name and show the world what really happened. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the anger between them softened. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something like trust. Days turned into weeks, and the truth began to unravel piece by piece. They discovered that the faulty valve was supplied by a third-party manufacturer, a company owned by Alexander's father's closest friend, Richard Vance. There were signed papers showing that Elijah Johnson had filed a complaint about the defect, but the memo had been deleted from the official archives. Amara clenched her fists. They buried it. They made it look like my father was reckless. Alexander's jaw tightened. We'll expose them. How? He looked up at her with the same determination she'd seen on that rooftop weeks ago. At the annual shareholders conference next month. All the media will be there. I'll present everything we've found. The files, the recordings, your father's designs. They can't hide anymore. Amara hesitated. And if they try to stop you? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then they'll have to shoot me down. But I've already learned something from you. Amara, you don't back down from the sky just because it's stormy. For the first time in years, she smiled. You actually listen. He chuckled softly. Don't get used to it. But deep down, something had shifted between them. It wasn't just a mission anymore, it was a bond. The late nights, the quiet moments of shared pain, the small smiles, they had started to heal each other in ways neither expected. One night, as they stood on the rooftop watching the city lights flicker below, Alexander said quietly, You know, when I told you to fly that chopper, I was trying to humiliate you. But instead, you reminded me what real courage looks like. Amara looked at him, her voice gentle. And you reminded me that not all men born into power stay corrupted by it. He smiled faintly. Maybe we both needed a crash to learn how to fly again. She laughed softly. For the first time, her laughter didn't feel heavy. It felt free. The day of the shareholders' conference arrived like a storm brewing over the city. Reporters swarmed outside Skyline's headquarters, cameras flashing, microphones ready. Inside, the grand hall was packed with investors, executives, and journalists waiting for the annual address from the company's young, charismatic CEO, Alexander Cole. But this year, the energy was different. Whispers had already started spreading, rumors that Alexander was planning to announce something big. No one knew what, but everyone sensed it would shake the company's core. Amara watched from backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. She wore a simple dress, not expensive, but elegant, one that Alexander's assistant had insisted she borrow for the event. Her hands trembled as she held a folder of documents. Her father's blueprints, the hidden memo, the evidence they had worked so hard to uncover. Alexander approached her, adjusting his tie. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. You ready? As ready as I'll ever be, she said, handing him the folder. This is everything. He nodded, taking it from her. Once I start, there's no going back. I know, she whispered. But some truths are worth the fallout. He smiled faintly. You sound like your father. Before she could reply, the stage lights dimmed. The host's voice echoed through the speakers, announcing Alexander's entrance. He stepped out to a wave of applause. Cameras flashed, and every eye in the hall turned toward him. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady. I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Skyline Aviation, but as the son of the man who built this empire. My father believed in ambition, innovation, and legacy. But today, I've learned that legacy means nothing if it's built on lies. A murmur rippled through the audience. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Alexander continued, his tone firmer now. 15 years ago, a test flight ended in tragedy. The official report blamed the pilot, Captain Elijah Johnson. But that report was false. The room fell silent. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Alexander projected the scanned documents on the big screen behind him. The blueprints, the defect notes, and the memo that had been deleted. Captain Johnson identified a fault in the hydraulic system before the flight. He reported it. He begged for the test to be delayed. But his warning was ignored. My father and his partners chose profit over safety. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some journalists stood up, snapping photos rapidly. Your father covered it up? One board member shouted in disbelief. Alexander nodded slowly. Yes, and I can't undo what he did, but I can make it right. Starting today, Skyline will release all records of past aircraft designs for independent review. Every hidden report, every silenced voice, including Captain Johnson's, will be brought to light. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some clapped, others shouted. The board chair stood up angrily. Alexander, do you realize what you're doing? You'll destroy the company. Alexander met his gaze. Then let it burn. Truth is worth more than profit. In that moment, Amara stepped onto the stage. The cameras swung toward her instantly. She could feel hundreds of eyes staring, but she didn't flinch. She walked to Alexander's side, her voice strong. My name is Amara Johnson, she said. Captain Elijah Johnson was my father. For years, I lived believing he was a failure. Today, I stand here to say he was a hero. The hall fell silent again. Even the board chair sank back into his seat. Your father saved my life, Alexander said softly, looking at her. And today, I hope I've saved his name. The audience erupted in applause this time. Genuine, emotional applause that echoed through the hall. Reporters shouted questions, but neither of them answered. They stood together, side by side, in the middle of the flashing lights, two people bound by truth and redemption. But not everyone was celebrating. Behind the scenes, Richard Vance, Alexander's father's old partner, watched from the shadows. His face was tight with rage. He's finished us, he hissed to his assistant. Expose him. Do whatever it takes. Within hours, the headlines exploded across every major network. CEO admits company's past crimes. Skyline stocks plummet 40%. Hero pilot's daughter clears her father's name after 15 years. Alexander spent the next 2 days buried in legal calls and crisis meetings. Lawsuits were being prepared. Investors demanded his resignation. But through it all, Amara stayed by his side. One evening, after another exhausting day, Alexander walked into his office to find Amara staring out the window. The city lights reflected in her eyes like tiny stars. I heard they're trying to remove you as CEO, she said quietly. They already did, he replied. The board voted me out this afternoon. She turned, stunned. What? But you? It's fine, he said with a tired smile. I knew it was coming. I exposed their secrets, Amara. That was the right thing to do. But you lost everything, she said softly. He shrugged. Maybe. But for the first time in my life, I feel free. There was silence between them for a long moment. Then she said, You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another rich man who didn't care about people like me. And now, he asked, stepping closer. Now, she said, smiling faintly. I think you're a man who finally learned what it means to care. He laughed quietly. You taught me that. They stood there, inches apart, the city humming below them. Something electric filled the air, not the tension of anger, but the quiet recognition of souls who had found each other through chaos. Later that night, as Alexander packed his office, Amara came in holding a small box. What's that? He asked. She smiled softly. Your father gave it to mine before the crash. It was in his locker all these years. Alexander opened it. Inside was a small brass compass. The engraving read, For those who dare to fly beyond fear. His eyes glistened. He saved my life, and still left me a guide. Amara placed her hand gently over his. Maybe now you can finally fly free, not as your father's son, but as yourself. He looked at her for a long moment. And what about you? I've spent years lost on the ground, she said. Maybe it's time I take to the skies again. He smiled. Then let's start together. Months passed, and the chaos slowly began to settle. The news channels had moved on to newer scandals. The lawsuits were still circling, but the storm that once surrounded Skyline was finally quieting down. The company's board replaced Alexander, and though they tried to rebuild their image, the world already knew the truth. But while the world forgot, two lives quietly began to rebuild, away from the noise, away from the headlines. Amara now lived in a small apartment near the airfield, where she had started training again. Her pilot license had been reinstated thanks to Alexander's legal team. Every morning, she'd walk to the hangar and run her fingers across the cool metal of the small aircraft she practiced on. Every day, she felt her confidence return, the same fire that once defined her father. Sometimes, when she looked at the sky, she felt like he was up there somewhere, smiling, watching her finally rise again. And as for Alexander, he was no longer the powerful CEO who ruled from a glass tower. He had traded tailored suits for flight jackets, boardrooms for hangars. He'd bought a small workshop near the same airfield, where he was designing a new helicopter model, one based on her father's original blueprints, improved, modernized, and safe. They hadn't seen each other in weeks. Both needed time to breathe, to heal, to find themselves again. Yet somehow, each sunset seemed to pull them back toward one another. One bright morning, Amara was at the hangar when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was, Alexander, wearing jeans, a gray shirt, and a smile that wasn't polished or practiced like before. It was real. "Long time no see," he said. Amara grinned softly. "I thought you were too busy rebuilding your empire." He chuckled. "Turns out empires aren't worth much if you don't have someone to share them with." She tilted her head. "You came all the way here just to say that?" He shook his head. "No. I came to show you something." He gestured toward the open hangar door. Outside, sitting on the tarmac, was a sleek black helicopter, smaller than Skyline's luxury models, but beautiful in its simplicity. Its design was elegant, aerodynamic, and engraved just below the cockpit was a name, the Elijah 1. Amara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You named it after my father?" Alexander nodded. He deserved to have his name where it always belonged, in the sky. She walked around the chopper, her fingers tracing the smooth surface. "It's beautiful. Did you build this?" "With a few trusted engineers who didn't leave when I was fired," he said. "It's the safest, most stable aircraft we've ever designed." "Your father's notes were the foundation." Amara smiled through her tears. He would have been proud. Alexander looked at her, his voice softer now. "It's ready for its first flight, and I can't think of anyone better to take it up than his daughter." She looked at him, surprised. "Me?" He nodded. "You brought me down to earth, Amara. It's time I help you fly again." Minutes later, they sat side by side in the cockpit, the same seats where their stories had once collided in mockery and pain. But this time, there was no arrogance in his tone, no fear in hers. Just quiet trust. Amara's hands rested on the controls. "You sure about this?" Alexander smiled. "Completely." The engine hummed to life, the blades slicing through the morning air. As the helicopter lifted off the ground, Amara felt her heart race, not with fear, but with freedom. The earth below grew smaller, and the horizon opened wide before them. The city shimmered in the distance, bathed in sunlight. "This feels different," she said softly, the wind brushing her hair. "That's because it's your sky now," Alexander replied. She glanced at him, smiling. "You used to mock me for dreaming like this." He laughed lightly. "And you proved that I was the fool." They flew higher, and Amara closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the vastness of it all. The noise, the pain, the shame, it all seemed to fade into the wind. After a while, she said, "Do you ever regret telling the truth? Losing everything?" Alexander looked out at the endless blue. "Every day I remember what I lost. But every time I see this sky, and you, I know I made the right choice." She smiled faintly. "You sound like my father." "Maybe he rubbed off on me," he said. There was silence for a long time, the good kind. The kind where words aren't needed because the moment itself says everything. When they landed, Amara stayed seated, looking at the horizon. "You know," she said quietly, "there was a time I thought I'd never fly again. I thought my life was over." Alexander turned to her. "And now?" She met his gaze. "Now I think maybe my life's just beginning." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Then, as if remembering something, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the brass compass she had given him months ago, the one her father had once owned. He handed it back to her. "This belongs to you." She shook her head. "No, it doesn't. My father gave it to yours for a reason. Maybe it's time it stays with the man who's learned to follow it." Their eyes met again. That same unspoken understanding that had brought them together from the start. Alexander smiled. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she whispered. He leaned back in his seat, looking at her with warmth. "You know, I once said I'd marry you if you could fly a chopper." She laughed. "I remember. You were a jerk." He grinned. "Still am, sometimes." "Maybe," she said teasingly. "But you've learned to fly beyond fear." He looked at her, his voice softer now. "Does that mean I still have a chance to make that promise real?" Amara blushed, shaking her head, but smiling. "Fly this chopper, and maybe I'll think about it." He chuckled, starting the engine again. "Deal." The helicopter lifted once more, rising gracefully into the sky. Two souls who had found redemption, truth, and love where they least expected it. Below them, the city moved on, unaware that somewhere above the clouds, a woman once broken and a man once blind had finally found their wings. And as they soared higher, the sunlight caught the name Elijah One shining proudly across the body of the chopper, a final tribute to the man who had connected their fates. For Amara and Alexander, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new journey, one built not on arrogance or guilt, but on forgiveness, courage, and second chances. Because sometimes, the sky doesn't just test who can fly. It reveals who truly deserves to. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more emotional and life-changing stories. Because every story leaves behind a lesson.